So
All
you were
right, so
saying
we're
you're trying to avoid the neural network stuff.
yeah. So I'm saying I'm happy to use the technology when it's absolutely easy and convenient for me, and if I can't avoid it. But I'm pretty much a luddite. So just as an example of this, it was early '90s. I was a staff writer at Scientific American. Must have been like '93 or '94 or so, and and somebody came into my office and said, "Oh, just wanted to let you know, Bill Gates is here. He's the guy from Microsoft, and he's going to talk to us about the internet. You know, you've heard this thing called the internet." And I said, "Yeah, I don't give a shit about that stuff.
It's a fad.
I I hate all that technology. Who gives a shit? I'm just into the search for the secret of existence. You know, where did the universe come from? Where does consciousness come from? Like, don't tell me about these gadgets. That's a lesser form of journalism." And so I was the only person on the entire Scientific American staff who did not go out for lunch with with Bill Gates talking about the future of civilization. So, and there's still a little bit of me
But do you
that
follow,
like that.
like, are you aware of what these things are capable of?
Yeah, I mean, you and in one of our conversations, you gave me an example of a chat. It's
Oh, that's right.
GPT. Yeah, like, okay, um, give me the beginning of a science fiction novel with a DMT theme or something like that. And it was pretty amazing, I gotta say. And so now you can't avoid it. Well, I try to
Right.
avoid it. Um, but everybody's talking about it, and people are sending me stuff privately also. Have you seen this? You know, check this
Yeah.
out. So it's, if I may comment, so actually my school, some PR person at my school said, "We're putting together a little news report, sending it to reporters. Do you want to comment on these things?" And my first reaction was like, who gives a shit? No, everybody's commenting already. I don't have anything to say. And then I thought, I should, try to come up with something. So my comment was, from the 50s, one of the first applications of artificial intelligence was to do creative things like drawing pictures and composing music and writing poetry. And some of it was amazing. I remember some of the poems were like putting words together in ways that no human would do. And the result was really weird and interesting.
In the 50s?
Yeah, 50s, 60s, maybe. I mean, the 50s is when artificial intelligence really took off, and it was kind of wide open, and people were doing all kinds of crazy things with it. There was a program that you've probably heard of, maybe we've even talked about, that came out in, I think, the late 60s, early 70s called ELIZA. You heard of this?
I do remember that. It's like one of the early chatbots, or what was it?
It's a psychotherapy program.
Right.
And so you talk to this thing, and no, you'd have to type, because there was no voice recognition back then. You type, "Hi, my name's John. I'm not feeling so good," and then the program would, a lot of it was just mirroring your comments and putting them in a question, like, "Oh, sorry, why don't you feel good?" And then you'd type, and I've read some histories of this thing, and what was remarkable is that some of these computer scientists, this was at MIT, would be talking to ELIZA, the program, and they'd start like weeping, and they would act as though they quickly forgot that they're writing, that they're talking to some stupid program, and they would anthropomorphize it and get into the part of the person confessing to the program. And to me, the lesson is that with all these products of artificial intelligence, we project shit like crazy on them. And a lot of the creativity is projected
Sure.
by us on them because, of course, these programs, most of what they produce is absolute shit, but it's curated by us. And we go, oh my God, look at that. You know, all these other poems are terrible, but that poem or that image is really amazing. Those are the ones that we draw out, and we
But
convince
that's kind of true of
ourselves.
humans as well. We project a lot on other
It's,
humans, and also most poems are shit.
yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's so, that's my jaded. I mean, everybody, all the professors right now are totally freaking out about this new frontier in the ability of students to cheat
Right.
on papers. We're trying to figure out what to do about that.
There's a novel by Pelevin. I forget if I told you about it. It's not translated into English, I'm pretty sure, so that's no spoiler. No spoilers there, but the novel is written from the perspective of an AI system. And it says it openly. It keeps repeating it and keeps driving the point home. The idea is, so this program is both, is sort of, it has two functions. One is to solve crime, and the other is to write crime novels. And the two processes are actually the same. It's like the novel is a byproduct of the process of solving the crime. It's just like dressed up and presented in a compelling fiction form. And from the first pages to the last, though there's a twist at the end, it tries to keep driving the point home, saying, like, it's written, I say I did this, or I present this idea that there is an I that's doing this. That's not true. I just know that this is a way to make the story more compelling to the reader. There's nothing going on. Then again, the same is true about you, the reader. You also, it's a neural network, and you learned how to speak and how to formulate these sounds to, communicate with other parts of this larger system. There's no you behind any of that. And so it's kind of like a Buddhist, take on the self as an illusion, but it's written in this very kind of practical, especially now. Like it's a few years old. These neural networks didn't exist the way they do now, but when you present the situation this way, it's very hard to argue against the idea that you can't tell whether there's something behind the words.
That's great. All right, there's a little bit of synchronicity here. So I happen to be, I'm always looking for reading material that will take me a while to get through. And sometimes I end up having to reread things. So that's one reason why I might reread Ulysses. It takes me a really long time to get through that. Or even Moby Dick. I'm rereading the collected stories of Sherlock Holmes right now by Conan Doyle. And there's, very early on, one of the first stories, Watson is talking to Holmes, and Watson has just begun publishing his versions of the cases that Holmes is solving. And Watson says, hey, did you see that, my write-up of, the last case that you solved? And he thinks that Holmes will be really flattered. And Holmes is disdainful, and he says, well, I appreciate, you're making me sound like a smart fellow, and that's nice. But why isn't it enough just to have the facts of the case and to explain the logic that led me to deduce the solution to the mystery? You have to throw in all this characterization, all this romantic nonsense is basically what he was saying. All this human interest stuff, which Holmes, who is like this, just kind of like a robot, like a logical machine, he could care less about all that stuff. So it's as though, Holmes wants the cases to be written up by some kind of neural net that leaves out all the emotion and the description for its own sake, and all that aspect of storytelling.
Well, with these, GPT chat, you can get any version you want. You can feed it something, say rewrite this as a fiction story, rewrite this as cold facts. It's not, at a human level yet, but it's new and it's been improving pretty quickly. And I don't know where that leads us, where we're going to be in 10 years if we're still going to be here.
Yeah, if I may, sort of going back to your previous comment about, that there's sort of no self there. The These fancy new language programs, they bring up some of the old questions about artificial intelligence, and the central one is the one that Alan Turing dealt with, and lots of others. Like, is a machine actually thinking? Is it sentient? Is it conscious? What's going on in there? And at some point, and Turing is saying that at some point you might have to grant that these things are actually conscious if they're indistinguishable from us, their responses to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this famous thought experiment called the Chinese room experiment. I forget.
That's
Have we
right.
talked about this? Okay.
I don't think we did, but I know what you're talking about.
All right. So I think it was first proposed by John Searle, this big shot philosopher, in the 1980s. And he said, and Searle, his whole career is basically saying the idea that machines can think is stupid. And so he's trying to make that point in the Chinese room experiment. He's saying, imagine a man in a room. He doesn't speak Chinese, but he's fed sheets of paper with Chinese characters written on them. And what he does is he's got a big manual that that has all possible combinations of Chinese characters in it, and he can look up the sheet of paper in his manual, and it will tell him what an appropriate response to that is, also in Chinese characters. And he can slip that out under the door back to the person outside. And so Searle is saying that here's a guy who seems to understand Chinese, but he doesn't understand it at all. He's just manipulating symbols according to this big rule book. And Searle says that's basically what machines do. Now, there are a lot of problems with this setup. I mean, the main one is that the whole problem of inferring consciousness to in any system, like a jellyfish or a human being or a smartphone or whatever, means that you're bumping up against the inaccessibility of consciousness. One sentient being can't know another is conscious. So Searle is assuming he knows what is happening inside the head of the guy in the Chinese room, and he can't. That's the whole problem itself. So he's using circular reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
But when I think about the Chinese room now, and this is inspired in part by my effort to understand quantum mechanics with the mathematics, which is totally baffling to me.
I've got some of the sketches for the cover.
Oh, far out. All right. Okay. Thank you so much, and I love the color version you came up with. Yeah, it's taken me back into psychedelic territory, this quantum experiment. But when I reflect on the Chinese experiment, in light of trying to understand the world with mathematics, which is what quantum mechanics is about, it occurs to me that we're all like the man in the Chinese room. We're
That's
all
my point.
isolated in this chamber, and we get these messages from the outside world, and we're like, what the fuck? But our brains have been trained. Yeah, I'm repeating what you just said. Our brains have been trained. It's a neural network, and we have associations, and we're sort of looking up possible responses in a giant manual. But it's just a matter of reflex and habituation, and we send messages back out, but we never really know what's going on. We never have any true comprehension. So the question isn't whether machines think. The question
Right.
is whether we really think.
Right. Right. That makes me think there are two sort of personal anecdotes that relate to this. One is I think the last time I've heard about the Chinese room was a few years ago. I was talking to a friend who I've known since age 14. And we've gone through a period of sort of distancing, which was not. Let me try to formulate this.
With the help of a cigarette.
Yeah, so it's like we didn't have a falling out or anything. There was just like when we would meet, a feeling of actual human connection was not quite there. And it was frustrating because it's an old friend, and we used to be very close, and so we were going through this thing, and we wouldn't meet very often because we lived in different countries, as everybody is now. I mean, in the Russian circles that I find myself in. And so we met at somehow we ended up both in Moscow for some period of time, and we went to a bar or something. And we talked about it. And I tried to explain the feeling. Like there was a particular moment he visited me at my dacha, like a country house. And he was telling me all these things, like how he was suicidal at some point, and how like what he was been going through. And I felt so shitty because I like maintained the conversation, but I was trying to be like a good person. There's this guy who's struggling with shit, and so I'm gonna try to do my best to be of use or be compassionate in this conversation. That's not the same as being a good friend. I wasn't feeling like this is my friend going through this. I wasn't really feeling this. And so then we sometime later we meet in Moscow and we talk about it, and he's like, I totally understand what you mean. And he gives me, I forget how the conversation went, like, which came first and which came second. But he told me about this experience, I think in London, where he was at some party, and I think there were not serious drugs present, but there was a lot of tobacco and a lot of weed. And he got drunk enough, high enough, thirsty enough for his short-term memory to get completely out of whack. And so there was a period of time where he's at the social gathering and he has no idea what the fuck is going on because he can't remember the last 5 seconds. So you would think you can't really maintain a conversation that way because you have no idea what was just said, what you just said, half a minute ago. But in that particular case, it's like, I was fine. Like, nobody noticed that I have no idea what the fuck is going on because all the conversations were something you can carry on instinctually. Like some person is making noises and I made some noises. I know that I made some noises in response. I don't remember what he said or what my response was, but I'm functioning, on the level that's necessary at the time. And he's like, that's like that Chinese room experiment. I was the guy in the Chinese room. And so that was it was funny how that conversation, made me feel that sense of connection to my old friend, while what he's talking about is a lack of any connection. Like, yeah, I've been going through this. I have no idea. People sim in a different reality. So that's one. And then the other is, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying that's great. I mean, the wonderful thing about this thought experiment and this whole issue is that it's like filled with all these paradoxes, like the one that you just described. Yeah, go ahead and tell me the
right. And then the other is
other story.
Much more vague because it's a memory from I don't even know what age, maybe 12 or something. And I don't know how much of it is a real memory and how it's just this weird kind of fog of old feelings. But I used to be at that time the internet was not. So if I was 12, and I'm guessing the age here, I was born in 88, so that would put us in the year 2000. The internet was there. We probably had a dial-up connection, so we couldn't get a lot of like you had to time yourself, like how many hours you can spend this month, and the speed was poor. And maybe we even didn't have a connection at home, and I would only get online when I went to school. There was this like a computer class that was open after hours, and you could go and like type on a computer and go online and see what's up. And I spent a lot of time in these chat rooms, which now can be automated. but at the time it was all humans, and I was a kid, like a child. This was like a period of my life from some very early age, like 9 or something, that I had some kind of access, maybe not immediate, and maybe before the internet there was Fidonet, which you just needed a phone. You didn't need to have a provider. And it was more like a forum, like you type a longer message and then the next day you'll get the answer. But I had this connection to this invisible world where I communicated with other people through text. And at that age, it was a very trippy experience, because I was meeting other people who were, most of them, way older than me, and they were having these conversations about whatever. And I would carry on these conversations, and they didn't know I was a kid, and so they treated me as whatever, a person on the internet or Fidonet. And sometimes they would talk more, and I would say, yeah, I'm 12, and they're like, no, you're not. I'm not talking to a fucking 12-year-old about whatever meaning of life. And anyway, so there was this feeling that I vaguely remember that I would get after spending, if I spent a few hours that day, either in these chat rooms or maybe just an email. I had like pen pals. And a couple of those were like early crushes before an actual relationship with an actual human woman or girl. There were these like invisible girls out there somewhere, and we would have these long email chains of conversations. And then at the end of that day, I'm falling asleep, or I'm laying in bed trying to fall asleep. And the feeling that I remember is like that process of falling asleep, that hypnagogia stage when you're in between waking life and dream. Sometimes there was this feeling of going back into your chamber in some jail or castle or something. And there's my connection to these people who were not physically present in my life felt like, somewhere behind this wall, there's a person. Maybe sometimes I talk to them, or I don't know if this is universal, but in Russian prisons, there used to be a code for how you knock on the wall, sort of like the Morse code, and you talk to people this way. And I would get this feeling of simultaneously connection and isolation. Like, I'm in this reality. I got born into this thing where I feel there are other people out here. And maybe it's more, you're 12, you having some conversation that feels meaningful to you online. And you're like found your people. It feels like, oh shit, somebody else is interested in the shit that I'm interested in. But they're not there. They're not like a friend that I have in school. And none of my friends at the time were online. So I would tell them these things. They're like, what the fuck are you talking about? You sit at a computer and there are letters, and who are these people? But I had this feeling of there's a connection to somebody, it feels like, but they're not here. And I think a lot of them also felt this. I think that the early internet had this quality of like getting weirdos together. Like you don't, and it's like I had a social life in the real life. I had friends and everything, but there was something qualitatively different about meeting strangers and strangers who were already sorted by things you're interested in. Like you can just type whatever online. It turns out there are people who are into this shit. And so there was this feeling of connection, like, oh shit, it's easy. I can find people, and I found some, maybe, though they're not here, so I'm not totally sure. And so I'm just trying to describe this weird, and I can't be sure whether I'm remembering something that actually happened or I'm projecting something from this life today onto what I don't remember. But I remember this weird mixture of isolation and connection, of loneliness and the lack of loneliness of connection.
I think you've just described the world we live in. I mean, that you were living in the future way before most of us, and certainly that more than your friends in Russia who didn't know what the hell you're doing. The weird thing is, the questions raised here are, what is it? When are we actually conscious? When are we actually understanding what's happening in the world? When are we actually having a conversation? I mean, here you and I are. So we're having a conversation about the possibility of whether it's truly possible.
I haven't seen you in the flesh either.
Yeah, that's right. We only know each other virtually. I can assure you, I am real. I'm not sure about you. I have, there's crazy shit going on in my head right now. You seem pretty real to me because you just constantly are saying things that surprise me, for one thing. So it can't be just a narcissistic projection of my own shit. There's this wonderful phrase, Daniel Dennett, this great American philosopher, has been irritating people for decades by basically saying that one way that Bob Wright puts it, our mutual friend, is that consciousness doesn't actually exist.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find some of the things that Dennett has written that sound pretty close to saying that, we're all zombies, there is no consciousness. That's not really fair to Dennett. What he's saying is that consciousness is highly overrated, and he has this wonderful phrase that I ended up using a lot. I mean, I used to criticize, heap abuse on Dennett just the way Bob and a lot of other people did. I'm beginning to understand him more and more and to appreciate what he means by denigrating consciousness. He's basically saying that consciousness is not that big a deal. Most of our lives we spend in an unconscious state, which is equivalent to the guy in the Chinese room. This is my version of it rather than Dennett's. I don't think Dennett just used the Chinese room, but we're on automatic. We have all these little programs in our heads, and even when we're doing something like talking to our girlfriend or talking to our wives or talking to friends who share our intellectual interests as we're doing right now, it's, there's some stimuli coming in, triggers a program, we send messages back out. How conscious are we really? And of course, this applies to all the sort of interstitial stuff. When we're walking around, we're going to the grocery store, we're zombies, we're on automatic. We're not really thinking. When are we truly conscious of what's going on? Is it when we're like tripping? Because
DMT
that
does that to me.
Okay.
And it's pretty fucking overwhelming.
Yeah. I mean, but is that reality, or is it just kind of, I sometimes think of an intense psychedelic trip as more like seeing the machinery,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're seeing beyond the machinery to the truth, whatever the fuck that is, who knows? But, and a couple of times I've taken ayahuasca, which is, my version that's got DMT in it. I have felt like I'm seeing kind of the machine code. So it's like the guy in the Chinese room all of a sudden has a vision of, the programs in his head, or the seeing the whole manual of rules at the same time as this kind of thing external to him. And it's like, what the fuck? And what does that have to do with truth? Where is the truth inside this labyrinthine device at the bottom of everything?
Yep. Yeah. I get this. The thing about an intense psychedelic trips, and I'm mostly thinking about DMT, but also mushrooms, is I've written this somewhere recently, that the DMT flash feels less like an experience that we have a limited amount time that we engage in, and more like a fact of life that we spend a limited amount of time facing. So the part of the overwhelmment that comes with these experiences, to me, is like I'm supposed to be aware of this generally. I feel like I should be conscious. And when I am, the world is different from my day-to-day. And it's noticeable also in, like, after the trip has already faded away, and I'm sober, and my normal patterns of thinking are there, and I feel like this is gonna pass too. Like, maybe until evening, I'm gonna have this residual feeling of sort of getting what is going on, and then tomorrow is gonna be gone, or at least in most of it is gonna be gone. And so it's very hard to even remember what sort of the issues were. Like what do you think about this reality?
I just this week I happened to be, so we're speaking on a Saturday now. I'm not sure when this will be posted, but let's see, it's January 28th. So this week I was talking about Plato's Cave with my freshmen. I love talking about it, even after all these years, and almost all of them have read it before. But I'm like, you haven't read it before. You've read it with John Horgan. I'm going to take you some crazy places. And so, I always ask them, are you in the cave right now? And is there any hope of getting out? And a lot of them say, well, yeah, I'm getting out of the cave because I'm in college and I'm learning a lot of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, forget that.
Nope.
You're just going deeper in the cave. You're getting brainwashed. So I try not to, I don't want to depress them. So one of the happy interpretations I have is that you can't leave the cave, but if you know you're in the cave, if you're aware that you're in the cave, that's kind of like getting out of the cave, just to know that you're in the cave. And if there's no hope of escaping the cave, if you don't even know that there's an outside of the cave where the sun is shining and, the light of reality is beaming down on us, then you might as well say there is no outside of the cave, which is kind of the same thing as saying that there is no cave. Right? So this is it. You're not in the cave. There's just this. And you can either, take it for granted, go, yeah, it's cool. It's nothing weird here. Just move on, reproduce, make money, and die like everybody else. Or like just go, what the fuck? Which is basically my reaction. It's like my whole career over the last few decades has been various ways of saying, what the fuck? What's going on here? And does anybody really know what's going on here? And no, I don't think so. Nobody does. Not Socrates, not Buddha, not Jesus Christ or Allah, Muhammad. Not God himself. Even God is confused. And by this time, my students are like, what the fuck?
What is your class called again?
This is just introduction.
What are you supposed to be teaching?
I'm supposed to be teaching elementary composition and how to read and write. You know, it's like
Okay,
freshman basic stuff. And
that's fair.
and I always end up basically giving them different versions of my psychedelic philosophy. Next week, they're supposed to read this famous paper by Robert Trivers, the great evolutionary biologist,
Mm-hmm.
on altruism. Like, why are humans
Mm-hmm.
nice? Why are animals nice to each other? And I have them read that, ponder that. And then I tell them the story about going to Robert Trivers'
That's a good story.
island hideaway with my girlfriend and being convinced for a few scary moments that he was going to murder me and my girlfriend. And my students are usually, again, like, what the hell? How did this guy even get a job at Stevens?
Well, I mean, Trivers has a whole career, and maybe he wanted to kill you,
I think he was definitely irritated with me.
contemplating.
Yeah.
To get back to the thing you paraphrased from Dennett, there's another similar to that. I was trying to express a childhood kind of feeling that is hard to keep in mind now, like relate to and figure out what it actually was. There's similar qualities to trying to remember a psychedelic experience, trying to remember how you felt or what you thought, or what seemed like truth in a psychedelic, within a psychedelic experience. And there's a feeling, and then I remember a conversation with a friend who, it was like a couple of years maybe after I had the experience where I had this feeling, and then she's talking to me about how she did mushrooms recently and she's trying to explain something, and I'm like, oh, that I remember. And so now I'm gonna try to formulate this thing. The feeling was that consciousness is sort of like an effect, is what happens when the material world intersects with some other kind of world. You can, formulate in different ways. A shortcut would be to mention Plato and the world of ideas. Maybe there's that reality of archetypes or whatever, and then there's the actual physical stratum. And when those things overlap, that creates an experience of there being something, that creates an experience of you going through this, or something going through this, something being aware of the thing happening. And that leaves you in a weird place as it comes to questions of free will and stuff like that. It's like, am I doing something here, or am I like an image that arises when some kind of a process is happening? Sort of like, I don't know if this metaphor is going to make sense, but for some reason I'm thinking about sitting at a campfire and looking into the fire, and you can see whatever shapes coming out of it. And you can get mesmerized by the play of the shadow and the light and all that. And if you were a kind of a pattern within that play of shadow and light, you might have a story about who you are and how it's all working. Maybe you're the essence of fire, you're the demon of fire, or whatever. But if you're looking at out from the outside, you think this is just what happens when I burn wood, when I try to keep myself warm. This is just something that occurs when a completely different thing is taking place for its own reasons.
Yeah, that seems very DMT-ish,
Mm.
where we're in our human world and we impute so much reality and substance to the features of our world, and especially the big things like love and suffering and justice and our desire for power, not to be pushed around. All these things that kind of are like the the forces that define our world. And then you imagine the higher being, one of these DMT elves, looking at us and just thinking how foolish we are to be so embedded in our own motives that we don't see. They're just, the equivalent of the light and shadow in the embers of a dying fire. That's kind of
embers of a dying fire.
Yeah, it's like that's sort of an art. I think of that as an archetypal psychedelic image because it's really beautiful and really kind of appalling at the same time. Like really, oh Jesus. It's kind of pointing out that there's meaning, whatever level of meaning you're at. There's always a level of absolute annihilation, no meaning at all, right under that. But then you can go through that, maybe find another level of meaning. So whether or not there's any, maybe Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad found, or Eckhart Tolle found that is this like pop guru. Yeah.
I was never able to listen to him for more than 10 minutes or something.
Yeah, well, and then you just pick your enlightened guru. They all suggest that they've found the bottom. Right. And I don't think there is any bottom. I think we're all in free fall, and nobody, Socrates also implied that he found the bottom.
Did he? I haven't read a lot of him, but what I remember being impressed with is exactly his framing of, I know that I don't know anything, that kind of thing. There's the framing of like, it might have been his like court speech when he was defending himself, where he says, I have this reputation of the smartest guy around, I'm the wise man and whatnot. I didn't ask for this. I never said I was wise. I was looking for wise people, and they, somebody would target me to go talk to this guy. I would talk to him. He doesn't know shit. I was not impressed. So I would go to another one. And in all of these conversations, I never pretended that I know much. I was just like, so what do you think is going on? And they say with confidence this and this and this. And it's like, that's not convincing. Here's a question. Can you answer that? No, you can't. So you don't know anything. And I'm like that. It's just, this is me trying to paraphrase Socrates, who I've read a long time ago and not
No, that, you've captured it. So his idea of wisdom was knowing how little you know. But his style of saying that was kind of obnoxious and arrogant. What I tell my students is I can see why the Athenians wanted to get rid of this guy. Maybe they didn't have to kill him, but he was definitely an obnoxious pain in the ass who made them feel bad.
Isn't it true that what we get from Socrates is like not only Plato's like rendition of what Socrates was talking about, but I've read somewhere that the only works of Plato that remain were supposed to be, like, he had a highbrow version, like this is actual like philosophical treatise, and then there was pop version, which was supposed to be a little more engaging and with humor in it, so that more people would engage with. And so I always think that, he presents Socrates as a character, and it's more interesting if that character is a little obnoxious, and there's definitely a lot of humor in it, and it might be like a friendly caricature on the method that the guy employed.
Yeah, totally. That's a whole area of criticism that you can engage in, trying to figure out what the difference is between Plato and Socrates, if any. Just going back to the idea whether Socrates really knew what was going on or thought he knew what was going on. I'm just thinking about the parable of the cave itself, where there is this one guy who gets out of the cave and he And then he realizes that there's this whole outside, and he sees the sun, which I think of as, it's a symbol of absolute truth and all that kind of stuff. And so that metaphor suggests to me that it's possible to have, to be enlightened, to really know what's going on, to see the absolute truth. Then you could ask what that means. Is it the same as mystical enlightenment, or is it just being educated in worldly affairs? But Socrates seems to be suggesting there that it's not just going deeper into ignorance and unknowing, that at some point you go, yeah, okay, now I see everything. And the question is what you do with that. But I agree. You're totally right that your interpretation of him as saying, I know nothing. That's why I'm so wise, because I know nothing, is absolutely valid as well. He's a complicated character, that Socrates.
When you said, I forget I won't be able to quote, but sun as the symbol of whatever, understanding,
absolute
the light
truth
of
or
awareness, absolute truth, made me think of a story experience. I don't know how to describe it. When I moved to St. Petersburg from Moscow, I moved into this apartment that had a problem. And the problem was with the washing machine, and I couldn't figure out what the problem was. Because I would put the clothes into the washing machine, I would start it, it starts doing its thing. I'm standing there looking at it, everything's working fine, and I leave. I come back, 3 hours later thinking it's done. It's not done. I enter the bathroom where the washing machine was in, and it's still in some early part of the cycle. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And I even bought a new washing machine. I paid half the price, and the owners of the apartment paid half the price because it's not fucking working. I was told there's going to be a washing machine that works. This isn't working. And the problem persisted, so it wasn't the washing machine. And so it took me a long time. It took me a long fucking time to figure out what was happening. And what was happening is whoever did the electric wiring in the apartment made it so that the light switch in the bathroom also controlled all of the outlets within the bathroom. And so I would come in, switch the light on, everything's working. I go, okay, so it's washing my clothes. I leave, I turn the light off, I go back to the room, nothing is happening behind my back. I come back 2 hours later, turn it on, it's working, but it was supposed to be done. And that, when I realized that this is what was happening, I have this tendency of trying to, and probably related to psychedelics, of trying to turn everything into metaphor for everything else. And I felt like, is this how my life is? It's like when I look at something, when I figuratively turn the light switch on, I'm like looking around, I'm like, okay, so this is what's happening. All right. Then I turn my attention elsewhere, and I have no idea what's going back there. And it might be not working at all. Is that why I'm like, whatever, can't get myself to exercise or fumbling through life and go through life? There are all these obstacles and issues. Is that because there are actual obstacles, or is that because I only turn the light on at in every individual room at the time when I'm there, and I have no idea what's going on behind me in these other parts of what I am?
Oh man, that is so quantum. I'm sorry to say this, but that is like, because the quantum mechanics poses the measurement problem, which is that, so the mathematics, the wave function is not describing the actual motion of a particle. It's the wave is a probability wave and you just use it to calculate where the particle might be at any given point in time, and you don't know where it is. You don't know where it really is before you look, and then you have to take the square of the amplitude of this, there's this whole fucking process. It's really kludgy and ridiculous, but it works. But then the question is, well, what's the particle doing when you're not looking? And as you probably know, it's there's a mathematical proof by this guy named John Bell that says the particle isn't really doing anything. It's not following a particular path. It exists in a kind of like one physicist I know and who wrote a book that really helped me understand all this shit. It's in a mist. It's a misty state. And you can't say, there's no details. The details don't actually exist before you look at it, which seems crazy. So it's like your washing machine, except that, the washing machine, it's not doing its job. But some clever person could write a quantum version of your washing machine story and have some deep revelation coming out of it about the nature of reality. Because, we're talking about the mind-body problem, about how our observation of the material world shouldn't make any difference, and yet it does. And what does that mean? Does that mean our observation is somehow necessary and mind is somehow necessary to existence? Which is what some of the mystics have been saying all along? That seems kind of hard to believe. But that's what quantum mechanics suggests.
Where are you at with all of this now? So is your quantum experiment finished?
Yeah, I'm preparing it for publication online, and in the same way that I published Mind-Body Problems online. And I actually hoped to find a commercial publisher, but I couldn't. I had an agent, she sent out proposals, and I think one problem is that I haven't had a commercial hit since the 1990s. I haven't had a book that really made a publisher a lot of money. So, publishers are like, I don't think so. This guy has a poor track record. And also, my proposal said, it's going to be about quantum mechanics and the search for love and justice and about how we have to deal with death. And they were like, what the fuck? What does quantum mechanics have to do with death? And it was one of those questions that baffled me, because to me, everything has to do with death. I mean,
I can see the death connection. What about justice? How does quantum mechanics connect to justice?
It's basically because while I was working on my quantum mechanics book, Black Lives Matter happened. George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, and all the street protests broke out, including one right outside, right behind me, on the street running past my building. And while I was actually working on linear algebra, trying to understand matrices, and so I just thought about what is the connection between physics and morality and justice. And most physicists and philosophers have said, do not connect our attempt to understand nature as a physical process with morality and ethics and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, well, why not? And it seems like these are that we need, if we're trying to understand matter and motion and how the world works, you have to include ethics and morality, because look at all these people marching by in the street. That's matter and motion.
In motion.
Yeah. And by the way, Socrates talked about this when he was awaiting execution. He was talking about certain philosophers who were saying that everything can be reduced to matter and motion, and you don't have to worry about ethics and all this kind of stuff. And he said, that's idiotic. He said, that's like saying I'm sitting here in this prison cell because of my muscles and tendons. He said, no, it's because, I've been saying these things and the Athenians got pissed off and they sentenced me to death. You have to deal with this physical situation in terms of these other ideas, that can't be reduced to physical stuff. And so, I'm just kind of ruminating on shit like that. Whether or
There's a
not I pull it off, I don't know.
there's a connection here, I think, with some of the conversations that I've ended up in the last few months, or year. Since the war, there every once in a while you meet this person who may express, their personal feelings, whatever, devastation, anxiety, shame, and so forth, but then they have this outlook on the world in which this war is a consequence of what they would call like objective, geopolitical processes. There are resources here. There's, these nations have these kinds of economic interests, and they were always going to clash. And so now it's happening, and it removes. I have a like I get what they're saying, but I can't relate to that properly because it takes out. It sounds like an excuse.
Yeah.
It sounds like a cop out. It sounds like I'm not taking any responsibility. Not only I'm not taking any responsibility, but also there's nobody responsible because this is just how things go. And we just ended up in this time and place where this is what's happening. But really is these like flows of power and influence and whatever else you want to put in there. And I guess you're kind of talking about the same thing on a higher level, not only in this particular situation, but generally, we need to think about whether we're a part of this. We have a causal relationship to what's going on, or there are just sort of physical laws that maybe connect to non-physical processes, or maybe in this view you would say that there are no processes that are not physical. And just like I was saying that consciousness can be seen as almost like an epiphenomenon, like it appears there's a guy going through a thing, but what actually is going on is this interaction between molecules in your body and something else. I don't know.
This all comes down to your view of free will. To me, free will only really matters when you're talking about our moral choices. The view that your friends have expressed that
I don't call them friends
or people and this is quite common. That humans are, especially if you look globally, you see populations kind of moving around,
right?
And there are these gigantic forces at work, and so it's silly to think in terms of human agency and free will. And one of the most powerful expressions of that idea came at the end of War and Peace. There's this long essay by Tolstoy on free will, and I was sort of thinking, oh boy, Tolstoy is going to defend free will. And to my horror, he does not. He kind of goes with the gigantic forces beyond our control view of history, and even says Napoleon and people like that are just sort of moving along with these tidal forces. And Tolstoy is so brilliant that he, I couldn't find any flaws in his logic, but I just at the end had to say, fuck that. I'm not a victim of fate. And I think humanity should reject that view, and we have to insist that we can do better than we have been doing, and we can have more justice and more peace than we've had in the past. We have to reject that sort of fatalism. But you just bringing that up makes me think I have to go back. I have this one chapter in particular kind of on quantum mechanics and justice. It's really more about physics and mathematics and justice. If you have a mathematical model of the world, where does ethics come in? How do you deal with that? Considering that we can't even agree on, for example, whether war is really bad. We keep finding excuses for waging war. But anyway, I'm going to try to take it on my quantum mechanics book, or at least flick at it.
We're at an hour mark. I assume you need to go eat your lunch.
Yeah. Yes, it's that time.
I've learned things about you.
Yeah, it's really good to talk to you again. It's been a while, and I just I constantly think about you when I'm reading about fucking shit show over there in Russia and Ukraine. I hope you and the people you care about are safe. I hope this thing is resolved soon. Although now it looks like
it doesn't look like it.
Yeah. But anyway, my thoughts go out to you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm fine. Not everybody I know is, but this is so Karina's grandmother is in Ukraine, and her city got some shelling, and they talk regularly on the phone on Viber. And one of the things that I think Karina got a little accustomed to it, but I remember in the early months, it would always like knock her off her kilter, was that she's talking to this woman who is like in the shit, in these horrible. I mean, she wasn't. She hasn't suffered actual physical. She's alive and nobody was blown up around her, but in her city, there is this devastation. And in these conversations, she's always saying we're good, and she's worried about Karina and me, and there's nothing to be really worried about for us at the moment. We're safe. There's no war. We're not in a war zone. We're not in Russia. I have income and she has, and we're fine. But there's this human thing happening where the grandma is worried, and the grandma is the one who is in this horrible situation, and she's just so, sometimes there are alarms, and it might have been somebody else than her who had to spend some time like hiding in the bathroom, because that was supposed to be the safer place, because the sirens were going off. And she's talking about it as like, we're good, I spent some time in the bathroom hiding from things, but basically we're fine. How are you though? Are you okay? And it's and you don't know what to answer to that, because we're okay. And it almost feels like I keep stumbling onto this. I don't know what word to use to describe this feeling. It's not quite shame, but something in the vicinity of shame, of like, I don't feel totally okay with me being okay when there are these things happening to people around.
I think that's if there's any hope for humanity, it's in those kinds of feelings, because we're not all sociopaths, fortunately, or we would have destroyed each other a long time ago. We actually care for each other. Some of us care for some of us.
Some of us do.
And that's what we can build on.
All right, let's try doing that. In the meantime, you can go eat your lunch.
All right. Thanks,
And I might
Nikita.
go get some whiskey or something.
Okay. Be well. I'll talk to you again soon.
It was great talking to you.
Yeah, same here.